Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Mrinmoy Pramanik. I teach comparative Indian language and literature at the University of Calcutta. Today we will discuss a module from comparative literature drama in India, and we will discuss on theatre, architecture, apparatus, censorship, spectatorship, translation and adaptation. The content of this module is written by Mr. Benil Biswas, Assistant Professor, Theatre Arts, Ambedkar University, Delhi. Vishnu Dharmatwara Puran says, in an exchange between the sage Markandeya and King Vajra, that to be a painter one must know sculpture, to be an architect one must know dance. Dance is possible only through music, and poetry therefore is essential. Quite appropriately, theatre encompasses all the above mentioned arts, which is vital for an individual and community's overall development. India is known for its rich cultural heritage, has harnessed the energy of theatrical forms since the inception of its civilization. A rich cultural heritage of almost 3000 years has been the nurturing ground for theatre and its folk forms, emerging after Greek and Roman theatre. Sanskrit theatre, closely associated with primordial rituals, is the earliest form of Indian theatre. Ascribed to Bharat Muni, Natyashastra or Natyashastra is considered to be the initial and most elaborate treatise on dramaturgy and art of theatre in the world. It gives the details account of Indian theatre's divine origin and expounds rasa. This text becomes the basis of the classical Sanskrit theatre in India. Sanskrit theatre was nourished by preeminent playwrights like Basha, Kalidasa, Shudraka, Vishakhadatya, Bhavabhuti and Harsha. This body of works, which were sophisticated in its form and thematic content, can be equaled in its range and influence with the dramatic yield of other prosperous theatre tradition of the world, like ancient Greek theatre and Elizabethan theatre. Even the Sanskrit theatre must have begun as a narrative form, with recitation, singing and dancing becoming its integral elements. This emphasis on narrative elements made our theatre essentially theatrical right from the beginning. That is why the theatre in India has encompassed all the other forms of literature and fine arts into its physical presentation. Literature, mime, music, dance, movement, painting, sculpture and architecture all amalgamated into one. Not just the description of how various kind of plays to be written. In fact, the Natyashastra mentions elaborate every dimension of stagecraft, from acting, stage design to theatre architecture. It is from Natyashastra that we get to know that the Sanskrit plays commenced with an elaborate ritual called Purvaranga. The Sutradhara, the narrator, stage manager and chief actor, enters the performance space, worship the presiding deity of theatre in most cases, Nataraja, Shiva, for the success of the performance and well-being of the actors and the audience. Then the Sutradhara summons the leading actress and stars and start the play with a prologue or incantation. One might cogitate that the Venus where plays were staged were considered sacred and came to be known as Rangamancha or Rangabhumi. However, distinct absence of irrefutable living evidence of the performances of classical Sanskrit plays based on the guidelines of the Natyashastra is a major impediment to consider that classical Sanskrit plays considered the Natyashastra as an instruction manual. To substantiate Sanskrit dramas indicate towards things that appears to concur with portions of the Natyashastra, but numerous Sanskrit dramas also contain elements that the Natyashastra forbids. For example, perhaps Avigyan Shakuntalam by Kalidasa is among the few plays that satisfy the definition of being a Nataka with the Purvaranga and Shutradhar mode of beginning of the play available in the text. Moreover, no living traditions of performance continued since either the era of Sanskrit drama or the Natyashastra. Kuttiyattam or Kodiyattam theatre may have originated in the 11th century, and it probably has the strongest claim to continuing the tradition of Sanskrit dramas, but ultimately the existing performance repertoire represents a synthesis of Sanskrit classicism and reflects the local traditions of Kerala. Thus, we have only the text of the Natyashastra and the ephemeral implications of Sanskrit dramas in the local folk Basha traditions of performance. Alternatively, the Natyashastra does provide us a significant and fascinating theory about theatrical performance that permeates South Asian aesthetics. Bharata's understanding of how Natya affects audiences rooted in Vava and Rasa still irradiate and beckons us to think of what theatrical presentations can do and how it can be achieved. Nevertheless, as the book is written in Sanskrit, a basic knowledge of Indian historiography will lead one to interrogate the positionality of the book vis-a-vis ritual and social hierarchy. It will further lead a conscious scholar to ponder on the readership of such a text with inherent class structure and casteism. This reading will be further accentuated by figuring out that interest in the discourse is a recent one, namely 16th century onwards under the evil guidance of mostly German Indologists. By 11th century, with the initiation of the Mughal era, the Sanskrit drama encountered a steady deterioration and it discontinued to be performed and was read only as literature. The theatrical requirements of the populaces were fulfilled by the traditional forms of theatre like folk theatre and devotional performances, etc., which varied from one Bhasha region to another and was the part and parcel of the masses. The Ramlila, the Nautanki of North India, the Kirtaniya of Mithila, Jatra of Bengal, the Chou of Odisha and Jharkhand, the folk plays of Tamil Nadu like Satharam and Nallathangal, the Yakshagana of Karnataka, the Kathakali of Kerala, the Vavai of Gujarat, all were the folk performances, practices that developed a foundation for the portrayal of Indian theatre and encouraging soul for the Western theatrical tradition. It is these folk Bhasha sensibilities and performances which have to be taken into considerations while pondering in the evaluation of theatre towards contemporary Indian theatre scenario in terms of architecture, apparatus and acting. Natyashastra bestows a detailed attention to the 3 A's of theatre: architecture, apparatus and acting. A comprehensive description of various types of theatre houses, Natya Mandapa, is available in the 2nd chapter of the Natyashastra. It provides detailed measurements and designs of types of theatre as well as information about the building of walls, columns, roof, etc. The description of theatre is so minute it could be difficult not to believe that such theatres used to be constructed at and before the time of Bharata, and that he must have been well versed in the versions, facets of the science related to the construction of the theatre house. For example, it mentioned in Natyashastra that theatre are of 3 types, depending on their shape. They are oblong, square, and triangular. Each type is subdivided into 3 according to the dimensions as large, medium, and small. The large theatre is 108 hastas long, middle is 64 hastas, and the small theatre is 32 hastas long. 1 hasta is equal to 1.5 foot. However, during the medieval period, theatre moved out of the Natya Mandapa and initiated new habitat in the streets, bringing about the notion of open performance spaces. The 3-side open stages for Jatra of Bengal, Tamasha of Maharashtra, and many other forms is a reminiscence of that curious give and take between the Sanskrit theatre and of theatre houses and folk theatrical space of Mela or fair ground. Ramlila of Ramnagar near Varanasi in Uttar Pradesh is yet another example such interesting transformation of performance spaces. Of course, the impact of Natyashastra can be seen in Hindu temple design after 10th century to include spaces for performing arts. For example, Kuttampalams in almost all the large temples in Kerala, Nat Mandir in temple at Khajuraho, Madhya Pradesh, or prayer halls, for example Namghar, initiated by Shankardeva in Assam and supported as dramatic art stage based on the square principle described in the Natyashastra, such as those in the peninsular and eastern states of India. In contemporary India, theatre artists like K.N. Panikkar at Shopanam, Trivandrum, Veena Pani Chawla at Adi Shakti, Pondicherry, and Ratan Thyam at Chorus Repertory, Imphal, have tried to recreate the spaces mentioned in Natyashastra. The architectural design of performance space at Sangeet Natak Academy and the 3 auditoriums, namely Sammukh, Bahumukh, and Abhimanch, at National School of Drama, New Delhi, are reminiscent of similar architectural spaces. The Basha folk theatre, which flourished during the medieval period, definitely traversed between these 2 polarities. On these lines, Indian Basha folk performances can be broadly divided into 2 categories: sacred or religious and profane or secular. This is the beginning of the theatre of religion and the theatre of entertainment. The religious mythology-oriented forms emerge as a result of the Bhakti movement in medieval India. The profane or secular folk theatre form, which belong to the Vandpather from Kashmir Swang tradition from Haryana, becomes an epitome of folk entertainment with profane element. The 2 forms, religious and secular, sacred and profane, operated in tandem, influencing each other. Historians can also be found in certain solo forms of Indian classical dance tradition like Bharatnatyam, Kathak, Odissi, Mohiniyattam. Folk dances like the Gambhira, the Purulia Chhau of Bengal, Saraikela Chhau of Jharkhand, and Mayurbhanj Chhau of Odisha also have a theatrical narrative element in them. The Natyashastra places much emphasis on the means of histrionic representation or abhinaya. They are the techniques used by the actor to portray the consequence from the point of view of the playwright or the character. It is anubhava, and from that of the actor it is abhinaya. 4 kinds of abhinaya are differentiated: gesture or angika, words or bachika, costume and makeup are aharya, and the representation of the temperament is sattvika. Thus, it was the period of total theatre, total acting, which incorporated singing, dancing, mime, dialogues, etc. As the plots of Sanskrit plays were generally based sources like the myth, epics, and folk tales, thus the audience was already aware of the story. Hence, the theatre required a visual presentation style through gestures, intonations, and stylized movements. In contemporary times, one could experience that acting styles in the works of directors like Ken Panikkar, Veena Pani Chawla, who explored the styles Natyashastra based on local tradition like Kalaripayattu, Kuttiyattam, etc. On the other hand, stalwarts like Ratan Thyam and Kanhailal in Manipur started to search for actor body within their local specific culture. It has to be noted that the renowned German playwright director Brecht evolved his theory of epic theatre and concept of alienation precisely from these sources. For example, Sutradhara or narrator, who most of the time also played the Vidushak or Joker, could anytime come out of the enactment and engage in a conversation and address the audience directly. Now let us talk about the issues related to censorship and spectatorship. Drama about life and plight of the common man. The masses now began to flourish as a prized literary genre alongside the modern genre of fiction, also as a response to Western influence. The city-based Parsi and Bengali or Bangla theatre were perhaps the precursor to the Basha movement into drama and theatre, followed by Marathi, Hindi, Kannada, Malayalam, Telugu, Bhojpuri traditions. The revolt of 1857 happened and slowly Basha theatre began portray and sway public opinion regarding the oppression rendered the dictatorial British government. It is late 19th century, slowly theatre became an apparatus of social change when dedicated patriots were committed to exposing social evils, some of which had resulted from British rule and some of which had Hindu society for centuries. This period marked by an unrestrained desire among Indian writers and producers to propagate independence is also characterized by suppressive restrictions imposed by the colonial government on the publication and performance plays. The first significant drama of social protest in India was Nil Darpana, the Mirror of Indigo Planters by Dinobandhu Mitra. Published in 1860, the play dramatizes incidents drawn from the revolution of 1858, in which Bengali indigo cultivators were mercilessly persecuted by the British planters for refusing to sow their crops. The incident is usually cited as the first attempt of Bengalis to harass the colonial rules. Farley Richmond vividly describes the entire episode in his significant essay, The Political Role of Theatre in India. The further goes on to theatrically pose a question to describe the government's attitude. I quote, "The popularity of Nil Darpana and subsequent works of its kind raised serious questions for the colonial government. Should all plays, regardless of their content, be permitted public performance? And should the press be allowed to publish a play, whatever sentiments it espoused?" I unquote. In 1876, Lord Northbrook, then the Viceroy of India, issued an ordinance as an emergency measure under the Government of India Act, giving the Government of Bengal full power to control dramatic performances until a new law could be enacted. On March 14, 1876, the Dramatic Performances Act number XIX was submitted to the Supreme Legislative Council and soon it became a law. The Dramatic Performance Act 1876 along with the Vernacular Press Act 1878 were frequently used by the government throughout the following decades to suppress dramatic performances and plays considered seditious. However, the urge for Indian independence had been unleashed and the government could only hope to slow down the process. Now let us talk about the translation and adaptation of dramatic text. During British colonial interregnum in 18th and 19th centuries, Indian theatre was reborn in form of dramatic literature. The stimulus ushered in from two sources, the rich legacy of classical Indian drama and the exposure to classics of Western dramatic tradition through English colonial theatres in cities like Calcutta, Bombay and Madras. Translation started to appear simultaneously of Sanskrit masterpieces and classics of Western canon, particularly Shakespeare and other English language playwrights. Till now, dramatic literature had not developed as a major literary genre in Indian languages or Basha. For instance, the first Bengali play staged in Calcutta on 28 November 1795 by a Russian G.S. Lebedev was Kalponik Songbodol, a translation of the play The Disguise. If one tends to keep aside Bangla, Kannada and Marathi, even minor traditions like Gujarati, Malayalam and Telugu too has elaborate Western and Sanskrit classic translation and adaptation. Hence, translation or adaptation is inseparable from the development of Bengali and other Bhasha theatre. Nevertheless, there are contradictions and conflicts regarding the acceptance of plays translated or adapted. Utpal Datta, who himself has translated Shakespearean play as well as modern European plays, critiques the very idea of mindless borrowing. Apart from Western classics, translation of new dramatic text only happened especially in Bengal and other parts of India with the emergence of group theatre. Shumanta Gangopadhyay and Somjit Haldar in an interesting analysis inform us it is not before the 1960s when group theatre had introduced on Kolkata stage plays by American dramatists. Many of the productions did not even acknowledge the original plays, perhaps from the fear anxiety that it could question the efficacy of the director or translator concerned. Similar trajectories could be charted out in other Bhasha traditions too. Institution of national importance like National School of Drama, Sahitya Academy and Sangeet Natak Academy commissioned and facilitated translations and adaptations. Aparna Dharwadkar corroborates, I quote, in their formal recommendations to the Sangeet Natak Academy, the participants at the 1956 drama seminar had suggested that these should be a special program of translation of well-known and stageable plays of the different languages of India into the regional languages enumerated in the constitution, and that these plays should be made available at moderate prices. This program of translations did not materialize, perhaps because it involved 16 or more languages. I unquote. Now, let us conclude. The active exchange between classical and the folk at one level, tradition and modernity on another level, native and West on yet another level, interaction between varied cultures specific to diverse bhashas, and finally the inherent multilingualism have not just enriched the corpus of theatre but of life itself. Aparna Dharwadkar sums it up quite poetically. I quote, both authors and audiences, the total effect of active multilingualism and circulation has thus been to create at least 4 distinct levels for the dissemination and reception of contemporary Indian plays, the local, the regional, the national and the international. But multilingualism is a collective activity, another possible causality of the strategies of insularity and in communication. I unquote. Therefore, to save us from insularity and incommunication and to celebrate the jubilation of dialogue, one should assemble regularly at last possible venue of human congregation, theatre. Now, let us summarize the whole discussion. This model this module mainly focused on architecture and apparatus of theatre. It talked about the censorship and the spectatorship. It talked about the significance and importance of translation and adaptation. In this module, we have discussed how the Indian theatre and Indian dramaturgy is concerned about the architecture and apparatus of theatre. There is a text what theorize, what offer all the instruction of theatre is Bharata's Natyashastra, and it talks about architecture, apparatus, methodology, acting instruction, norms, ethics, everything of theatre. And if we go into the Basha theatre, if we go into the folk theatre, we can find that there are extensive examples, there are proper guidelines either in written or in oral form in our almost every theatrical forms. So architecture and apparatus is also found in our oral traditions, oral folk theatres, oral theatres, and Basha theatre forms. So this is how we can have a deep and wide study about the architecture and apparatus of theatre. And architecture and apparatus of Indian theatre is so various and so wide that it is innumerous. It is not possible to gather all these in a same place or in a limited space. From this discussion, we also understood that theatre is a composite art. It is composited by different art forms, and we have so many theatrical forms in our Basha, in our folk theatrical tradition, which engages dance, drama, speeches, music, recitation, and what not. We came to know about all these things in details with all the examples. And later we discussed about the censorship and the spectatorship. We informed that what was the kind of censorship on the drama, because the British Empire was afraid of the social value and influence of theatres among the people. So there were huge censorship on dramatic practices, on theatrical practices. And later we discussed about the translation and adaptation, and we came to know, we understood that adaptation and translation is integral in the theatrical tradition, in theatrical culture and theatrical practices. Since the very beginning of the professional theatre, we are translating Sanskrit classical theatres, classical dramas into Basha languages, into Basha, and we are also translating English and other European text into Basha to perform. Not only that, in modern times, we have been translating a dramatic text from one Indian language to another Indian language. And if we don't talk about all these things also, the theatre itself is a translation. If we take example of Roman Jakobson, and if we talk about the inter-Semitic translation of Roman Jakobson, we can understand that it is about the translating dramatic literature into the theatre, into the acting, with the body language, with the speech, with the voice, modulation, and etc. So in this module, we have tried to focus on all these issues. Thank you.